If you want to earn in the top 1% of salespeople, you need to install a $1 million mouthpiece. The way that you learn to speak is going to determine how high your income as a salesperson can go. I was able to close over $1 million a month in cash collected as a salesperson. That allowed me to take home over $100,000 a month in commissions. I've taught this $1 million mouthpiece to other salespeople. And at the time of filming, I have 4 salespeople inside my Unicorn Closer Mastermind that have all implemented this, and all of them have earned over $100,000 a month in commissions. I'm going to share with you the 5-part framework to have a $1 million mouthpiece to be a salesperson who can close $1 million a month and beyond. Let's crack in. Starts by understanding what your communication or how you speak is actually doing. I have a straight line, and the straight line is showing no money on the left, $1 sign, and a lot more money on the right, or multiple dollar signs. And in between, we have 5 different things. Those are the different things that you're going to implement as part of the $1 million mouthpiece for you to be able to speak like a top 1% salesperson. This straight line represents where you are going in your speech. So when you talk, you need to know, I'm going in this direction to this destination. And that's where most salespeople go wrong. They just open their mouth and words come out. They don't even have a straight line system for what that communication is even trying to do. Your communication is simply a straight line to a destination, or we could say a main line to you earning more commissions by closing more deals and by serving more prospects. So I'm going to start by putting on this diagram here what the end represents, where you are going. Now, obviously on the left, I'm not going to write it down. It is representing where you're at right now. So let's get into what the different pieces are that allow you to ensure you get to the destination where you intended to be going, the outcome that you have when you get to that destination is correct, and that your navigation to that destination is in the shortest, simplest, most direct way possible. So the first thing is that it's actually the final piece to having $1 million mouthpiece that's the most essential, but it's also the one that takes the longest to develop. And so I'm going to leave that to the end. But if you don't understand the final piece, none of the previous 4 that I'm going to mention for the $1 million mouthpiece are actually going to work at the highest level that they possibly can. So what's the first one? The first one in your communication, in how you speak, is actually what's known as acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. So let's look at some examples. A non-top 1% salesperson, someone that earns an average income, isn't building the life of their dreams, isn't closing many deals, and ultimately just isn't providing a massive amount of value to the marketplace, is someone that when the prospect speaks, their acknowledgements are misaligned, incongruent, false, and I'll give you some examples. If your prospect says, I have a baby on the way, which is an example that I use many times inside my mastermind to my students, it depends the rest of the context whether you're going to acknowledge that in one way or another way. Let me give you an example. If your prospect says, business is going great, making a bunch of money, got a baby on the way, when they stop, you might say, cool, nice, congratulations, excellent, something like that. If the prospect says, oh, things are really hard, the business is inconsistent, I'm not making the money I need to be making, I'm super stressed, and your prospect says, and I've got a baby on the way, you would be a complete moron, and it's what's called uncalibrated as a salesperson, to acknowledge that in the wrong way and say, congratulations, you got a baby on the way. The amount of salespeople that I've seen screw this up and then wonder why at the end of the sales call they get a trust objection or a fear objection. In other words, a smokescreen that the prospect simply doesn't want to say, you didn't listen or understand my real, deep, authentic situation. I don't want to give you money, align myself, or buy from you, is insane. The amount of salespeople that screw this up. So the first thing is acknowledging in the wrong direction. you have to make sure your acknowledgements are actually calibrated. That's the first piece to acknowledgements. The second piece to acknowledgement is that your acknowledgements have to be detached. The opposite of this is your acknowledgements are obviously attached. And what are they attached to? They're attached to you having a low sense of self-esteem or having a high ego, which actually comes from a low sense of self-esteem. And therefore, the acknowledgements that you are delivering to your prospect are simply for you to seek approval, seek validation. And I'll give you an example. If your prospect says, yeah, the business is going great, I'm making a load of money, and you're like, wow, that's awesome. No, that's where the definition of sleazy salespeople comes from. You're on a sales call because the prospect is not where they want to be. And so you have to understand that to change the tone of the sales call to congratulatory, patting someone on the back, being their friend, being buddy-buddy, is actually going in completely the wrong direction to what a sales conversation should be. Your acknowledgements instead should always be low-level reactions. For example, prospect says, my business is doing really well. I'm making a load of money. You might say, cool, or got it. We might even say, understood. You are not sharing anything with your acknowledgements because when you do share with your acknowledgements, there is a hidden agenda behind it. And a hidden agenda shifts the frame from you being the leader and the authority on the call and the one leading the prospect to the destination they want to get to. And it now shifts that frame upside down where the prospect is the one running the show. So the first thing with your communication, if you look at how the top 1% salespeople speak, even the top 1% CEOs, anyone that's in the top 1%, when they listen to somebody, and especially in the context that the conversation they're having is to guide that person, to lead that person, to teach that person something, to collaborate with that person, their acknowledgements will always be very level-headed, and it's almost like having a poker face. Prospect says something, got it, understood, okay, cool, no problem, no worries. The salesperson that allows their acknowledgements to get too elevated or even too low, although I've very rarely seen that, is the salesperson that is controlled by their emotions. And they're controlled by the emotions and their emotions, and those emotions are actually coming out through the visualizing and listening to the prospect and thinking, oh, I need to be approved, I need to be acknowledged, I need to be liked. You've probably heard the phrase know, like, and trust. Your job on a sales call is not to be liked by actually what's called mirroring the prospect. And so the prospect's super excited about their income. So you get super excited about their income. Your job is to be the stoic one, the grounded one. So the first thing for being a top 1% salesperson by speaking with $1 million mouthpiece is to change the way you acknowledge what the prospect says. So I'm going to give you a handful that have always been my favorite. You have cool. You have interesting, another one is got it, and another one is okay, or another one is just yes or no. In other words, you say as little as possible when it comes to acknowledging what the prospect says, and you say as little as possible in your emotions. Now, you might need to speak to acknowledge what they say to check you've got it. Okay, so you said this, then you said this, then you said that, then you said that. That is not emotional communication. That is very logical, that's very rational. So does this make sense? The first one is that you have to shift how you acknowledge things on your sales calls. The top 1% of salespeople, they are so unemotional when it comes to the acknowledgements that they give their prospects. And the reason for that is that they have done the inner work to not be a leaf in the wind that gets blown up and down by what your prospect is actually saying. And so let's conclude this first one, acknowledgements, with a title for how you should be acknowledging. And the way to look at this is your acknowledgements should be what I call DA, which means detached acknowledgements. Okay, so the first one we have detached acknowledgements. Good closer, top 1% salesperson, they always have detached acknowledgements. Not a good closer, low-level salesperson that doesn't earn the money they truly want, their acknowledgements are always attached, and almost always it's coming from a need to be validated, seek approval, be buddy-buddy with their prospects. Let's now move on to the second way to speak like a top 1% salesperson by installing part 2 for the $1 million mouthpiece. So this next piece is your intentions. Now, you might not be at the level yet as a salesperson where you understand that people can feel your intentions. It's not just what you say, it's why you're saying it. Top 1% salespeople always have a purpose when they speak. And their purpose is not actually to close a deal. Their purpose is definitely not to be friends with their prospect. Their purpose is to get to or to illuminate the truth. And so the way I look at this, and the way that allowed me to earn over $100,000 a month in commissions, was to use something called the benevolent alpha intent. Okay, benevolent means all loving. You're caring about people. You're trying to help. And alpha means we're not fucking around. I'm just going to say the truth, whether you like it or not. I'm not going to tell you what's nice to hear. I'm going to tell you what you need to hear. But again, if that is not coupled with benevolence, that is arrogance, that is ego, that is you just being an asshole. So you have to combine these two things, the benevolent alpha intent. And so what does this look like? A salesperson that doesn't have the benevolent alpha intent, they ask questions or they talk through the conversation to try and box the prospect in. Well, if I get them to say this and I get them to agree to this and then I get them to agree to this, they can't go anywhere. That is not benevolence. That is manipulation. That is psychological warfare. That is not healthy. It's also not sustainable, because if you have a conscience, eventually you'll realize I'm closing some people because they were the people that were able to be manipulated, but I'm making money and I actually feel bad for it. So the whole point as a salesperson to be the top 1% is to make the money you want, but to actually be happy, to enjoy selling, to feel that sales is service, serving your fellow human being on an individual level. So the second piece to having $1 million mouthpiece is to always have the intention that anytime you're talking, you're trying to unpack the confusions and get to the absolute truth. The whole truth, nothing but the truth, all of the truth. Okay? And so when we ask questions as a salesperson, you want to always be looking for discrepancies. Now, in NLP, these fall into some categories. And to be clear, you do not need to learn NLP. I learned how to do this before I knew what it was called, before I knew there was actually a name for this. I was taught by a mentor. This person allowed me to build my income to earning over $1 million by mastering how to be a top 1% salesperson. They never labeled this stuff. They just showed me through demonstration and through reviewing my calls, which is what I now do for my clients inside my mastermind. And my mentor actually co-leads that mastermind, showing, not telling. And so an example of having the right intent is when your prospect says something that deletes a piece of information. And so they say, for example, my business has some things that aren't working. That's a deletion because they said some things. They removed the actual specificity of what things. So you have to ask them, well, what things exactly are missing? What specific things are missing? What precisely is missing right now? And you would have to fill in the gaps by seeking, illuminating the truth. Let's look at another example. Another example is generalizations. So a generalization is where the prospect, if I was selling a dating offer to help guys or help girls get more dates, which is something I personally sold in my career, prospect might say, every woman out there isn't what I'm looking for. Well, that's a generalization because it can't possibly be that every woman out there is not what this client's looking for. And so you would say, is there any women out there that could be what you're looking for? Oh, well, yeah, there could be if it was this, this, and this quality that they embodied. And then we're getting closer to the truth. And so your intention as the benevolent alpha intention is to get closer to the truth, closer to the truth, closer to the truth, closer to the truth. And the reason for this, you can look at it in a spiritual way, you can look at it in a logical way. To solve a problem, we need to have clarity on what's actually the truth. If you look at it in a spiritual sense, the truth will set you free. Once you have conscience and awareness to what's actually happening, and that's therefore your intention as a salesperson, closing someone, getting them to give you their credit card, getting them over the line, actually just happens by default. When your intention was always to uncover the truth, the closing part just happens without you even trying. The truth is what sells people. Not everybody, but the people that didn't close from the truth, they were never going to. There are some people that can be staring at the truth and they're in so much denial or rationalizing or just lying to themselves. They've suppressed and repressed the truth so deeply, it's not able to allow them to make the changes that they need to make. Those people will just be those people until their time is ready for them to make the changes. But everybody that is closable, the way you close them is have the intention with everything that you're doing as far as the conversation in a sales call being to get to the truth. My duty, my job, how I'm showing up as a salesperson is simply to be the benevolent alpha, knowing that my benevolence is to get to the truth and my alphaness is to get to the truth. If I focus on getting to the truth, that is what will move the conversation forward. When you look at people that communicate that are not top 1% salespeople, they just talk about stuff. And even when the prospect says something where there's a missing piece of information or they've generalized some information, the salesperson just ignores that. Your job is to have a conversation with a purpose. And the purpose must always be getting to the truth, never trying to sell someone. So there you have it. The second piece in the $1 million mouthpiece is having the right intention. Every word, every question that comes out of your mouth as a salesperson, if you want to speak like a top 1% salesperson, must always be getting you closer and closer and closer to the truth. That is the second part to having a $1 million mouthpiece. Let's get into the third one. So the third one is your actual tools, which are questions, statements, and stories. Now, in other words, the content. What exactly are you saying? We've done acknowledgements. We've talked about the intention. But aside from when I'm acknowledging what the prospect said, or aside from my intention when I'm about to speak, what do I actually speak? What do I say? You only really have three options: questions, statements, and stories. Question, you know what that is. It starts with who, what, where, when, why, how, or is if you ask yes, no questions. You've got statements, which is where you're actually saying something that is not from personal experience. It's just, this is information. And then stories are where you are telling something about yourself. Those are the only three things that you can talk about. So you can say a question, information, or a experience or a story. Okay. When you look at the top 1% of salespeople, they do not tell stories. That's actually low-level people that are always telling stories. If you look at the people that tell loads of stories, even if they're comedians or, just good storytellers, that skill of telling a story is not directly correlated to selling people. The skill of selling people is to get the other person talking. And when you are telling a story, the other person is listening. When someone is listening, they are not in their head unwinding, like on the previous point, to go deeper and deeper into the truth. To get someone to go deeper into the truth, they have to be the one talking, okay? And so the top 1% of salespeople who have a $1 million mouthpiece, they are always opening their mouth and saying a question or a statement. And you might wonder, well, why a statement? Because a statement is actually an implied question. I'll give you an example. If I say, sounds like your business is a roller coaster right now. That wasn't technically a question. It was a statement about the information that I've been given from the prospect, but that prospect then has to agree or disagree with that. So I'm getting the prospect to do the work. When you tell a story, okay, so let me tell you a story about the time when I went here and I did that and then this happened, the prospect's not doing any work. And if the prospect's not doing any work, they are not emotionally, spiritually, and physically invested in the conversation. That is why then at the end of a sales call, your prospects give you objections. They tell you, oh, I need to ask my wife, or oh, it's a lot of money, or I don't have the money. Those things happen most of the time because the prospect wasn't invested in the conversation. $1 million mouthpiece in this third piece here is about getting the other person to be invested in the conversation. If you review your calls and you look at the transcript, you need to be looking at how many times am I talking about myself and my life versus how many times am I making statements about what the prospect said, or how many times am I asking questions about what my prospect said. If you increase the percentage of the latter, asking questions or making statements about the prospect's information, you will increase your close rate because you are actually getting the prospect to invest more in the conversation, in the problem, in the solution, and as I said before with the intention, in getting to the truth. So the third piece here is the content of what comes out of your mouth must be focused on questions and statements, not stories, not you talking about your life. Do not do that if you want to be a top 1% salesperson. Now, there is a caveat to this, which you might hear or see or hear of. a business owner that gets on sales calls and tells a bunch of stories. They're not selling or closing the deals because they tell a bunch of stories. The deal was already going to close because of the conviction, the certainty, and the clarity of the business owner and the fact that they're the business owner. So be careful when you're learning and implementing $1 million mouthpiece. When you hear someone else do something different to these things and you think, well, they're closing some deals, you have to look at causation, not correlation. There isn't a correlation. There might be a correlation between a business owner saying a lot of stories and closing deals, but that's not causation. The causation in that case would have been the brand and the authority, the fact that it's the business owner, and the conviction that that business owner has. So just want you to be clear. Sometimes it can be misleading and take you off track when you look at things and you get confused between certain things happening and a result being created because of that. So hopefully you're enjoying this training. Now, if you're brand new to the channel, you can skip this. But if you've been watching my videos for weeks or months, you've gotten value, you've implemented, you're making more money because of it, the question I have for you is, what are you doing? Still sitting on the outside? Are you someone who's going to continue to just watch free content when deep down you know being on the inside, being mentored by me directly, being around other unicorn closers is the thing that would take you to the next level? If you think you're getting value from the free content I'm putting out here on YouTube, what do you think happens inside the mastermind? So if you know you're ready, if you're at that point, you've seen what you needed to see, click the link below this video, jump inside. I'll see you there. Now back to the training. If we go one layer deeper into questions and statements and how you take these to the next level so you can be a top 1% salesperson, there's two things that you need to be aware of. When you ask questions, at the front part of a sales call, front part of a conversation, front part of a discussion, you are trying to gather as much impartial information as you possibly can. In other words, you're just trying to find out the situation. You're not trying to lead the conversation. You're not trying to manipulate the prospect. You're not trying to even get the prospect to agree to certain things or to commit to certain things, committing to an action, not yet. And therefore, at the front part of a sales call, when you ask questions, you want most of, if not all of your questions to be open-ended questions. Things like, what is going on? Or how is that going? Or why is that happening? Will elicit from the prospect more information. And the more information the prospect gives you at the start, the more you can spot where the patterns are, which you then need to go deeper into. If you ask questions like, is your business going well right now? Yes or no? You're going to get very little information. The top 1% salespeople ask the most open-ended questions, especially at the start of a sales call or a discussion or a conversation. And by the way, all of these things that I'm teaching you here, you don't necessarily have to be in a sales conversation to try and sell someone something, a product or a service. You could just be in a conversation where you are trying to have a deep, real, authentic, and a persuasive conversation. And so this third piece here of spend most of your time using questions or statements is how to be more influential, how to be more persuasive. So ask open-ended questions. So we've got open versus closed. And at the second half of the call, you can ask a few more closed-ended questions. Are you ready to make a change today? Prospect says yes or no. But watch this. I will then follow up with a closed-ended question. Why? Make sense? So more questions, more statements, less storytelling. The worst salespeople that I've seen on offers that I've scaled to $1 million a month in cash collected and beyond are the closers that talk and talk and talk and spend most of the time talking about their experience, talking about their stories, talking about their opinions. Do not do that. That is not having $1 million mouthpiece. And the best way to develop this piece here is use this outside of sales calls. Ask questions more outside of sales calls. State back to people what they said when you've asked them a question prior, and spend a lot less time you being the one doing the talking. And when I first learned this skill as a salesperson back in 2020, I was working 4 jobs. I was working 60 hours a week to make a whopping £1,500 or $2,000 a month. And I thought I was pretty smart. I thought I had a relatively high IQ. I didn't think I was significantly higher than most people, but I didn't think I was a dumb person. And then when I got taught by my sales mentor how to install this $1 million mouthpiece, one of the first things I started doing was when I would spend time with my friends or family members, I would spend a lot less time talking about myself and telling stories and much more time asking questions about them and their life. And one thing I noticed was that all of those people I interacted with would finish the time that they spent with me and say how much they enjoyed it. Oh, it was so great to hang out with you. Oh, it was so nice to see you. I had a great time. And they would say things like, I had a great conversation. And I'm thinking when I first learned this, it wasn't really a conversation. I was just asking you questions and you were doing all the talking. So the thing to understand when we have the sales adage of know, like, and trust, people like you, not because you said anything for them to like, but because you got them to talk about themselves. This is in the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I believe it's the first chapter. It says, the thing that people like to talk about most is themselves. And the thing that they like to hear the most is their own voice and their own name. And so focus on these principles to be speaking like a top 1% salesperson and have $1 million mouthpiece. And you will earn a lot more money. You will be a lot more liked, and you will go further in life, whether it's in social interactions, business interactions, or even romantic interactions. All right, let's get into the fourth one. The fourth one here is pacing. Pacing. Having mastery over pacing. Top 1% salespeople know that there is a time to talk faster and to just keep talking and keep talking and keep talking, especially, for example, if a sales call needs to move forward more quickly. There is also a time where they say nothing and they literally just sit in silence. Your ability to move the pacing around and to know when you should change the pacing is critical if you want to speak like a top 1% salesperson. I remember hearing that what creates a piece of music is not just the notes, it's the spaces between the notes. That is a great way to understand this piece here of pacing. It's not just the words you say that have an influence on what the prospect is going to respond with. It's how you say it. And I'm not talking about tonality. I'm talking about, did I say something and then pause? Or did I say something and then say something and then say something? Both of those deliveries, which are changing the pacing between what you're saying, will have very different outcomes. To learn this, you need to get around a top 1% salesperson, because the best way to learn pacing is by a process called osmosis, which simply means it rubs off on you. When I started spending time with my sales mentor, I started to understand pacing without thinking about it, without learning about it in a book or watching a YouTube video on it. I started to just embody it. That is the best way to learn pacing. Now, why is this so important? It's because on a sales call, you want to be pulling your prospects in. And one of the ways to do that is to deploy silence. Say nothing, and your prospect will have to lean more in. The more you talk, the prospect has to lean out. But there are obviously certain times where you need to move the conversation forward more quickly to get through everything that you need to do. If you observe the top 1% salespeople, or even the top 1% speakers, public figures, you will notice that they have mastered pacing, the ability to use silence and say nothing to do more work, in other words, move the conversation more forward, than if they'd have said 5 paragraphs. So that is the fourth one. Now let's get into the fifth and final piece for how to speak like a top 1% salesperson and have $1 million mouthpiece that can allow you to close over $1 million a month in cash collected single-handedly as a salesperson. The final piece, and I said this is the most important one, is outcomes. Not good salespeople, the outcome that they're always looking to have is to close someone, to convince someone, to manipulate someone, to persuade someone, to influence someone. In other words, they're in an interaction with two people, you and the prospect, and they're trying to use their speech to change the prospect. That's not how the top 1% of salespeople speak. What the top 1% of salespeople are doing when they speak, their outcome, is they have their boundaries, their standards, and what's acceptably aligned for them. And they are asking questions using pacing with the intention of getting deeper into the truth by being a benevolent alpha, using acknowledgements that are unemotional and very stoic. What they're trying to do is see, is this person aligned with what I personally am aligned with and what my offer, so my product or my service, is aligned with? They are never trying to change someone. And this is the most persuasive and the most powerful way to actually close more people, is to never be trying to change someone's opinion. When you lean out and all you're looking for is, this is what we need to see from a prospect for them to be considered a potential client. It's either they're aligned or they're not aligned. Your prospect feels that you don't need them. You don't even want them. It's just what happens, happens, and how the chips fall is how the chips fall. So let me give you an example of what alignment would look like And then also an example of what you would do if there isn't alignment. And this is how the top 1% of salespeople communicate with the outcome. In other words, where they're going, which is why it's this final point here, is not to sell. In fact, it's not even to do anything. It's to see if plus how we have alignment. So there are 4 things as a salesperson that you need to have alignment with for someone to have a high likelihood of enrolling in a program, giving you money, but also to be a good client, and also for them to be the type of person that you may have to continue interacting with, depending what your position is in a business, and they would align with your highest level standards. So the first one is, do they have a burning problem? It's not, can I make them have a burning problem? Can I make the problem that they have be a burning problem, even though it's not really that burning? That's not the point. The point is, do they genuinely have a burning problem? How are you going to get there? Using pacing, asking questions, making statements, the right intention to get deeper to the truth, and to have a non-emotional set of acknowledgements. That's how you figure this out. But ultimately, they either have a burning problem or the prospect doesn't have a burning problem. And it is what it is. Most of the time, if you do the first 4 things of having $1 million mouthpiece, your prospect will have a burning problem. Okay? Second one that you need to have alignment on is there a strong desire and a commitment from the prospect to solving this problem? You ask questions and you figure out yes or no. Your job is not to make someone desire something, make someone committed to something. And by the way, the salespeople that try and do that, they make less money and they hate selling and they get burned out. The reason you get burned out is because you do not have $1 million mouthpiece. And the 5th point here, your outcome isn't the outcome that would be from $1 million mouthpiece, which is just let me see if we have alignment. It's let me have an outcome of trying to box someone into what I want, which is they say what they agree with what I say, they do what I say to do, and they buy from me. That's very exhausting if you're trying to create an outcome, as opposed to you just being like, this is what is a fit for me. And you're either meeting me where I'm at or you're not meeting me where I'm at. And if you do, cool. If you don't, that's also cool too. By the way, example of detached acknowledgements. It's cool if you agree. It's cool if you don't agree. Totally detached. Not, it's great if you agree, and it would be terrible if you don't agree. That's not how a top 1% salesperson communicates. That's not $1 million mouthpiece. All right, so let's go back into the outcomes for alignment. Do they have a strong desire and a commitment to solving their problem? The third one that you need to have alignment on is, are they willing to admit to me, and therefore to themselves, they need help to solve this problem at all, or at the level they want to, or at the speed they want to. In other words, they need help. Are they willing to admit that? Again, it's not they have to admit this. It's, are they willing to admit it? And if they don't, then I'm not bothered. I'm not emotional. I'm not fazed by it. I'm not triggered by it. That's fine. It's, I'm just seeing if they're willing to admit that. If they do, we're aligned. Cool. If they don't, that's fine. No worries at all. This allows you to enjoy selling, find selling easier, and make a lot more money in commissions every single month. I have closers inside my sales mastermind. You can find the link for that below if you want more information, called the Unicorn Closer Mastermind, who are making over $100,000 a month in commissions by installing $1 million mouthpiece, which is one of the pieces to being a unicorn closer. Someone that single-handedly can generate for a high-ticket offer for a business $1 million a month in cash collected, which when they get paid 10% of that is earning themselves a take-home income monthly of $100,000 a month. That this is how, by having this $1 million mouthpiece. So the third outcome of alignment that you're looking for is, are they willing to admit that they need help? And the fourth and final one that we need alignment on is, do they trust us, me as the salesperson and or the business, at a certain level to be the ones to help them? So you are asking questions. You are using your pacing. You are using detached acknowledgements, and you have the intent of a benevolent alpha to get to the truth, to see where you and the prospect stand as far as on the spectrum. Yes, we're completely aligned. We're a little bit off alignment, or we're just not aligned at all. This is the outcome that a top 1% salesperson is looking for, not to convince someone, not to manipulate someone, not to change their mind, just to see if we have alignment. What happens if there isn't alignment? You would then do what's called an unsell, which is a great example of the difference between a top 1% salesperson and an average, mediocre, poor salesperson. If you do not have alignment, you recite one of the four things, if it's one or two or three or four, if it's all four of them, that you didn't have alignment on. And you just state that you don't have alignment. And then you state why that matters. So I, for example, could say, got it. So John, it doesn't sound like we have alignment. And the reason for that is anybody that we would consider bringing into this program or service, they have a burning problem. And it doesn't sound like you are at that place right now where this problem that you have is really a burning problem. And then you use pacing and you shut the fuck up and you say nothing. And 8 out of 10 times, if you've done everything else right in the discovery, if you have your internal mastery down, if you have the right structure to a sales call, if you're having an authentic, non-scripted conversation, the prospect will turn around and say, yeah, this is a burning problem. I guess I'm just not really communicating that to you. Okay, interesting. Acknowledgement. Not, oh, great. Well, I'm glad that you're now telling me that. No, that would be an attached acknowledgement. You would say, okay, interesting. And I could just shut up then and use pacing again. I don't even have to ask a question. Let's look at what that would look like. Okay, interesting. And then I shut up and they say, the thing is, Josh, it's such a burning problem. I've just been in denial. Okay. Again, I could just acknowledge and say, okay, use pacing again, stay in silence. Do you see how using these techniques and stacking them together in the example I'm giving you, this is how to speak like a top 1% salesperson, have $1 million mouthpiece and make a shit ton of money. Because the prospect's now going to do all the freaking work. I'm not going to get tired. I don't have to convince. I don't have to manipulate. I love selling. Selling is easy. Selling is serving my prospects. And it's all down to the way that you speak. And so let's keep going in the example. The prospect says, I've been in denial. And I say, okay. And I shut up. They say, but you know what? The reason I'm still in this position is because I've been in denial. Okay. Say it again. Okay. Detached acknowledgement. Not, oh, that's fantastic that you've realized that, John. Congratulations, buddy. And you're now patting each other on the back. No, you don't do that. That is not how top 1% salespeople, unicorn closers communicate. Let's keep going in the example because this is stacking all these together and giving you a real example. I say, okay. And he says, but you know what? Enough's enough. I have to admit the truth, which is what the benevolent alpha intent is. And you're getting to the truth through the combination of the pacing, the right outcome, the detached acknowledgements. But I have to admit the truth to myself. Otherwise, I'll be in this position and I'll never get out of this position. Got it. Or I would probably in that case say understood. And then again, I would shut up, see if he has anything else to say. Maybe he does, maybe she does, maybe they don't. At that point, I could say, so how much longer are you going to choose denial, knowing that choosing denial will guarantee that you never get this handled? And that would be my closing question. And that's it. That is combining in an example all of these pieces to $1 million mouthpiece. This is how to speak like a top 1% salesperson. What about the final example here in the unsell? If you do an unsell and the prospect's like, yeah, you're right. This isn't really a burning problem. Detached acknowledgement, stoic, not a big deal. You say, cool. Probably then I would just shut up, see if they say anything. And then depends what happens. But let's say they don't say anything. I could say, awesome. Well, anyone that we would bring into this program that has success, they would have a burning problem and they want our help with it. Obviously, you're not at that point at this moment in time. If anything were to change in the future, feel free to reach back out. And what this does, although this is a very small amount of times that you end up in that position, it prevents a salesperson getting into this place where, because there wasn't actually alignment, they're now trying to drop their standards, offer price discounts, try and offer free bonuses, or just simply placate and simp to the prospect to try and get a deal over the line. And the moment that you simp, the moment you placate, you are fucking your identity. Your identity of, I'm a top 1% salesperson, I'm going places in my life, and these are my standards of excellence, and they are take it or leave it. The moment you start cutting corners, you are then going to watch your income get worse and worse and worse, because when you cut corners, you can't wake up in the morning, look yourself in the mirror and say, I trust you. That is the worst place you can be in for a salesperson, because then you do not have clarity, you do not have conviction, you do not have certainty. And as I said, using the example before of the business owner that's closing, those things have a massive influence on selling more than the words that you're saying. So that is it. That is an example at the end of this training of how $1 million mouthpiece all fits together. Let's do a quick recap. And then you need to assess yourself and say, am I speaking, communicating in a way that my prospects are going to respect me? They're going to listen to me. They're going to see me as an authority. They're going to open up to me. They're going to tell me, myself, and themselves the truth. And they're ultimately going to buy from me if we have alignment. Number one is acknowledgements. You do not want to be going up and down in your state and your emotions as a salesperson if you want to be a top 1% salesperson. Second one is your intention. Your intention is not to get the prospect to say this or to get this outcome on the call. Your intention is just everything I'm talking about is to go from lack of clarity or vagueness or untruth or falsehood to the truth. As long as I just focus on getting closer and closer and closer to the truth, that is my only intention. Third one was asking questions, making statements, not you getting up on your high horse and soapboxing and telling your experiences here or what you think the prospect should do or how great your program and service is. Show, don't tell. And the thing that is going to show to the prospect the truth is their own words. If it's not their own words, it goes in one ear and out the other, and they are not invested or associated to the conversation. They are what's called disassociated, which means they're talking, they're having a conversation with you, but they're not really invested in what they're saying. That then deletes ownership. It also removes the amplification of the pain for the prospect, which is one thing you need to get them to buy, the burning problem. And therefore, you don't close deals. You have to do a wasted amount of time doing follow-up, and you end up having to try and handle objections at the end of a sales call. The fourth one is pacing, knowing when to talk a little bit quicker, when to talk slower, and when to say nothing. And the top 1% of salespeople use a lot more of nothing than they do talking more or talking quicker. If you listen to top 1% salespeople, or what I would call unicorn closers, there is a lot of gaps of silence in the entire sales call. So try implementing that in your next sales calls and watch what happens. Sales will become easier, sales will become more fun, and you will earn more money by closing more deals. The fifth and final point to have $1 million mouthpiece is your outcomes are never to sell. It is to know what you are looking for as far as your standards, and someone is either aligned with that or they are not. You are never trying to manipulate, squeeze, push, pull the world and your prospects into what you are looking for. You stand back, you know what you're looking for, and you ask someone without an agenda, without an ulterior motive, without a narrative, what do you think? What would you like? How do you feel? Where do you want to go from here? What's next? And they either come to you or they don't. As someone that earned over $100,000 a month in commissions and went on to train Alex Hormozi's old gym launch sales team, the more you lean out, the more your prospects lean in, and absolutely the more money that you will make as a salesperson. So that is how to speak like a top 1% salesperson. That is the 5-part $1 million mouthpiece. If you implement this, if you execute this, if you master this as a salesperson, you can be the next salesperson that closes $1 million a month in cash collected. Just imagine for a second having a mouthpiece that allows you to pull $1 million in cash from the world and put it into the place where you are, whether it's the business that you're closing for or if it's your business, into your own pocket. If you're a salesperson closing for someone else, your ability to maneuver, to orchestrate, to guide $1 million of cash out there in the world into where you are currently standing will earn you $100,000 a month in commissions if you are on an offer that pays you 10%, which is what the closers are getting inside my Unicorn Closer Mastermind, who are all closing over $1 million a month in cash per month. They're all earning over $100,000 a month in commissions. If you want help to master this, the best thing that you can do is get around a community of other unicorn closers that are installing $1 million mouthpiece. You will learn more from your environment and from what's called osmosis, as I said before, things just rubbing off on you. Your standards, which is everyone around me is communicating now like this, than you will trying to get a piece of paper, write this all down and study it. On top of that, if you want to implement this at the highest level, you need personalized feedback. A person that is overweight or skinny that goes to the gym and lifts weight to build muscle and or to lose fat that doesn't have the right form, what happens? They do not get the results they want at the level they want. They can even get injured and they waste a massive amount of time. That time for you as a salesperson is not just time, it's lost money. It is opportunity cost for you to be living the life of your dreams, to have the watch, to have the car, to have the house, to travel business class or even private jet, to wear the clothes you want, the luxury brands, to retire your parents, to buy the investment property. Whatever it is you want to do, you have to earn more money. To earn more money, you cannot be the average middle of the road salesperson. You need to be the top 1%. If you know anything about economics or sociology, the money goes to the top 1%, as they call it, the 80-20 principle. 80% of the money is earned by 20% of the sales people. It's actually more extreme than that. 95 to 99% of the money is earned by the top 1% salespeople. If you want to be in the top 1%, the best thing you can do is join a private mastermind that is specifically dedicated to nobody but the top 1% of salespeople. That is the mastermind I run. I teach salespeople how to self-actualize, how to earn more money by becoming more as a person. One of those pieces of becoming more as a person is to install a $1 million mouthpiece. They self-actualize, they earn more money, and they build the life of their dreams. If that's what you want to do as a salesperson, and you do not want to kick the can down the road knowing it is going to cost you money to not have direct access to a mentor and a community and specific training to master these skills, if that's what you want to do and you are ready to become a unicorn closer who is at the top 1% of salespeople in the industry, click the link below this video, join, and I'll see you on the inside.